I'm Andra Miller. I'm an editor at Ballantine Books, and I still feel like it's incredible kismet that I have the privilege of working on The Beekeeper of Aleppo. The acquisition was kind of a lucky fluke in a way. In the weeks leading up to the Frankfurt Book Fair, all of the foreign agents and editors come through town because they sort of want to hear what's buzzing, what should I follow at the fair, what's exciting. And so I had this German editor at my desk, and I'm like, I got nothing for you. I'm like, nothing's been like, getting my juices flowing. She's like, me too, in Germany. She said, except this one book that I just won at auction called The Beekeeper of Aleppo, about this Syrian beekeeper and his wife, who's a painter who has gone blind from the trauma of what happened to them when the war came to their town. And they go on this refugee journey through Turkey to Greece to England, where they're waiting to see if they're going to get asylum. And then, she went along her way, and I thought, God, that book sounds kind of good. But for some reason, I thought she said it was a memoir, and I'm like, oh God, memoir is so hard. But then I'm like, but the title's really good, so maybe I should check this book out. So I chased it, as we say, and I found this lovely Irish agent who was handling English language rights, who just sold it to the UK. And I didn't know her, and she just said, oh, sure, I'll send it to you. And she sent me the manuscript, no cover letter. I just sort of got this email in the middle of the night. And I'm like, it's kind of sketchy, but I started reading it. So I started reading it, and luckily on the title page of the manuscript it said a novel, and I'm like, yes! I mostly do fiction, so this is good. And I started reading it, and I'm like, oh my God, this is really good. And I'm like, who else has this? So I emailed it, I read it immediately in a day or two. I gave it to my bosses immediately, and we bought it immediately. I called Christy that week, and we had a lovely chat, and we bought the book. And it turns out I was just ahead of it. She hadn't quite gone out with it in the US, so lucky me. And what the German editor had told me was that the reason this book had struck her was it just was written with incredible empathy. It was incredibly emotional, and it really brought home the refugee story in a very human way. And when the Syrian refugee crisis was happening, we all, oh God, I'm gonna cry talking about your book. I think we all, felt a connection somewhat. We saw horrific pictures, but fiction can do something, I think, can bring something home and humanize something in a way that newspaper journalism just can't. So that's really, when I finished this book, I had to close the door to my office because I was crying so hard. Not because I was devastated, but more because I was hopeful. And it wasn't just me. This book has sold in 18 countries. Across the pond, they did pub a little ahead of us, and it's now number 4 in England and number 1 in Ireland. And I'm going to let Christy tell you more about her journey.
Hi. I think I'm a little short for this mic. This time's fine for me because it's actually about 1 o'clock in London. And I woke up at 4 today. In the morning. And I convinced the hotel staff to let me have breakfast a bit early. So the morning time's all right. So I actually missed my flight because I was meant to fill in an ESTA. I didn't know what that was. It's like some kind of visa that I didn't know that I had to fill in. So I actually missed my flight and I had to get on another flight. So I'm really glad that I managed to actually make it here, and thank you for having me. So I want to tell you a little bit about The Beekeeper of Aleppo and why I wrote it. I turn to writing when I feel emotional about something, or when I feel really overwhelmed about something, or sometimes when something's really tearing me apart. Again, it kind of draws me to write, and that's why I wrote this book. But I'll tell you a little bit about my story and how I got to writing it. My parents were refugees after the war in Cyprus in 1974. They went to London and set up a new life there. And I think actually it was a little bit easier back then in the 80s. I was born in 1980, 6 years after that war. My dad was a commanding officer of that war, and I didn't know it at the time, but I understand now that he suffered quite severely from post-traumatic stress disorder. It took me years and a lot of therapy to figure that out. And he often used to say, why do you need all this therapy? And I was like, don't ask that question because you don't want to know. But anyway, not to blame my dad or anything. He's a lovely man, but he had issues. So anyway, I grew up in this environment where, yes, it was a happy household, but I could feel that there was something not right. And there was a real darkness there. And my parents had lost their home and friends and family. So that was the environment that I kind of grew up in. So anyway, after my mum died, my dad, he decided to go and live in Cyprus again. He lives on the far east side of Cyprus that faces Syria. And I went to visit him Easter of 2016. And it's a really beautiful place. It's like, the sea's beautiful. It's really calm. It was Easter, so there wasn't all the tourists that are normally there. And I looked out across the water and I knew that if I got on a little boat, I'd be in Syria in about an hour and a half. And I couldn't understand how I could be so safe on this beautiful beach and that there was such devastation going on, just what felt to me like an arm's length away. And I could not stop thinking about that. So anyway, I had to go back to London. I'm a lecturer in creative writing at a university there. And we have these long summers that last from like April to October. So I thought, well, I want to do something. I felt absolutely compelled to do something. I now realise that doesn't just come from me sitting there by the shore, but also the fact that I was brought up in an environment where a lot of my family were refugees themselves. So something compelled me at the time to go and do something, and I couldn't go to Syria. So I decided that the thing that I could do was go to Athens. And because I speak Greek, I rang up various organisations and I ended up in a women and children's centre in Victoria Square, which is central Athens. And this was a safe place for women and children. And I had various duties, like I would either be on shower duty, or I'd serve tea and biscuits, or I'd play with the children in the play area. And at first it was just chaos. It was just like whizzing around. I didn't even have any time to think. And I'd go home in the evening, have something to eat, fall asleep, and next day start again. But as the days went on and I started to see things and observe things and absorb things, I started to kind of get this feeling that I might want to write something here. But initially, because I felt so sad and so overwhelmed, I just saw so many things. Like, for example, we had an area for new mothers, and there was this mother that came in, and she couldn't breastfeed. The baby had been born in Athens. She was living on the streets, and they'd just put her in the camps. The camp was called Ellinigoi. It was an old airport that had been turned into a camp. It was dire. There were loads of tents and lit up departure signs, but people weren't really going anywhere. Macedonia had closed their borders. Anyway, so this woman would come and sit on the sofa every day, and we'd give her tea and biscuits. We didn't have a food license. And this little boy, he wouldn't take the formula, and she couldn't produce the milk. So we were really scared that the baby might die. But we sat with her every day, and we gave her milk and tea and biscuits, and we just sat next to her, and we held her baby when she wanted to have a shower. And then after about a week or two, she got really excited one day and started pressing her breasts, and we saw that she was producing milk again, and the baby started to feed. And his little eyes opened to the world, and it was that moment that I've even got goosebumps now because I remember her face. She had like this beautiful blue eyes, and it was that moment that I thought, even in this kind of, even in this place where there's such utter devastation, there's so much resilience, there's so much strength, and these women built friendships with one another. And anyway, I saw lots of different. I could talk about this for hours. But I realised then that I would want to write about it, and I started to interview people in the square. People wanted to talk, they wanted to tell their stories, not everybody. And there were language barriers, but some people did want to talk. Anyway, I returned to the UK, and because I had decided to write the story, I decided to learn Arabic. It's really hard. It's harder than Greek. I can't speak it without my tutor, but I learned a little bit because I knew I wanted to go back. But the amazing thing was that my tutor was a refugee himself. He was also a translator for the BBC, and he translated for boys who were having their asylum interviews. So he taught me about the asylum process. He taught me about Syria before the war. I couldn't write the Syria bit. I was scared to write it because I said, what right do I have to write this section? I've never been to Syria. And he said, I'll help you. So we got the map out. He said, where do you want your characters to go? I said, here. So we went, right, so they need to go down this road, then this road, then this road, then this road. And I said to him, what trees would be there? What would the flowers smell like? What does the soil smell like? Because I know in Cyprus the soil has a particular smell, and I wanted to know, what does the soil smell like in Syria? So he helped me with the Syria bits. I also learnt that Arabic is a very beautiful metaphorical language. Like people will say, I wish you a day of morning light, or I wish you a day of cream, instead of good morning. So anyway, I decided to go back the following year, by which point the drop-in centre had turned into an activity centre. The women were learning languages and skills that they needed to progress in their lives. And I saw again that strength, the resilience we have as human beings. And again, that desire I had to write this story just grew. And by which point I'd already started writing. When I came back to the UK again, that's when I realised that my character I don't know how I came up with this, I just woke up one morning and I thought, Nouri is going to be a beekeeper. So I started to research agriculture in Syria, and I met a wonderful man called Dr. Rial Dalsous, who was also a refugee. And he's now in Huddersfield in the north of England, and he's set up a project called the Bruz Project, where he teaches refugees and job seekers how to keep bees. He taught me about bees, how they communicate with one another. He taught me about the way that they communicate with one another through a dance. I went to meet the bees. I thought I was going to die, but I didn't. I really did, because I didn't have any protective gear on. So anyway, that's another long story. I could really talk about this for hours. But what made me write a piece of fiction instead of maybe like non-fiction or an article or a series of articles was that I saw in the media, and I understood that the way that it was presented in the media kind of stopped me before I'd gone to really kind of connect with what was going on. And recently I wrote an article about the power of storytelling. And there's a psychologist from the University of Oregon who's done some studies, a few people have, but who's written about how as humans we find it difficult to empathize with larger groups. And that a quote that I find quite beautiful is that he says that statistics are humans with the tears dried off. So I was really moved by that quote, and I thought storytelling, and especially reading a novel, because film can have a similar effect, but I think when you're reading a novel, you live with those characters for a while. So I created the character of Nouri and Afra. They're fictional. They're not based on the people I met. They're inspired by the people that I met. And I had this scene in my mind of Nouri walking in and into his home. The streets beyond are absolutely broken and collapsed. They've lost their son. Afra has been blinded by the bomb that's killed her son. And Nouri gives her a gift, and it's a pomegranate. And that was the first scene I had in my mind. That's not even the first scene of the novel anymore. But it was from there that the characters grew, and Nouri developed a voice, and I felt like he was talking to me. I felt like I could hear Nouri. So I continued to write, and then eventually I got to know the characters, and I felt like I lived with them for a while. So that's the story of how I got to write this novel, and I hope you enjoy it.